please help me in welcoming Gabriela Lena Frank.
Well, thank you. Well, I know we don't have a lot of time, and so I thought what I would do is just give you a snapshot of my early life. From time to time, I take stock of my bio, and I just conduct a retrospective, and I just think, how the heck did I get here? And I keep going time and time again to the mentors that I had that maybe sometimes even unknowingly put me on a certain kind of path. So I was born in '72 in Berkeley, and my mom and my father married at a time in the '60s when it wasn't nationally legal for people of different races to marry. So we have to think about how it wasn't very long ago that people of color could not vote, they could not marry. I mean, and it puts into perspective where we are today, where, yes, I am celebrated at the Met Opera. I'm the first woman of color to ever get a work done at the Met Opera. It's a rare opera in Spanish. Some of the operas that have done this opera, it's called El Último Sueño de Frida y Diego, the last dream of the great Mexican painter Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. It's a young opera that just premiered 4 years ago, and the houses that have done it, San Diego, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago. Just time and time again, I was the first woman, I was the first person of color, it was the first time they've done something in Spanish. I mean, that was the case in San Francisco, which is known for its diversity, and yet somehow the classical music institutions have been playing by different rules. So while this is happening, in my green little purse over there, I carry my US passport, because I look like somebody who's going to get interrogated on the streets for whether I am a proper American, whether my citizenship is valid. And these two opposites I hold at the same time. What a moment in history that we are in this place. So I think a lot about how the arts mirror what's going on in society, to mirror our values, to mirror the tensions. And we know that this country is one that was born with great violence. And centuries later, we are still dealing with the choices that were made by our predecessors. I mean, this is the long arc of history that we're talking about. So when my mom married my father was a Peace Corps volunteer in the '60s, and just like nowadays, you don't pick where you're stationed. So, I mean, he's a nice Jewish boy from the Bronx, and so he was stationed in this small and beautiful Andean nation of Peru, which was starting to find some wealth in contributing to the international industry of fertilizer, whether it was guano, which is bird poop, or anchoveta, anchovies that they were catching from the ocean. And during this time, there was a great explosion of interest in Peruvian music because of the fledgling recording industry that was coming to life. So when my parents wound up in Berkeley, because my dad was a student at Cal, landing during the Vietnam War protests, and the Berkeley hippie heyday that was going on then, my mom really had a great awakening where she could pursue her artistic interests in a way that she couldn't back in Peru. So I grew up in a household in which my father became a prominent Mark Twain scholar at Berkeley, and my mom was a very active stained glass artist. My older brother became a neuroscientist, and I was the musician in the family. And this is my first lucky break. When we musicians talk about our lucky break, we often talk about like, somebody got sick and I stepped in at the last minute and I played the rock third piano concerto. So I had something dramatic. It's often not something as quiet as I had parents that encouraged independent thinking. I had parents that encouraged us to be artistic and to be intellectual, and that was cool to be nerdy. And my first piano teacher was a refugee from South Africa who would give me African songs to learn alongside Clementi and Bach and Beethoven. And she gave me my first experience during world premieres. You know, the annual student recital, she would rent out a little church, and I would just get up and I would just extemporize something at the piano. And so just imagine that for a little child, where the adults in their family are encouraging that kind of expression so that it is normal. So all through my young life, I was exposed to Peruvian music because there was so much turmoil in Latin America in the 70s and 80s that there were a lot of people coming out of South America, and they were opening up restaurants, and there were several South American music clubs. And there I would see people that didn't look Mexicano, they looked Peruano, like my mom. They looked part indigenous, part Chinese. I would see instruments like panpipes as tall as I was, little charango guitars, which is our version of the Peruvian version of the ukulele. And I would go home to the piano, and if I saw this on the guitar, I would try and do that at the piano. Now, it's not It's not Mozart with the nice passage work. And my teacher would sometimes scold me in her wonderful Afrikaner accent. She would say, Gabriela, one does not improve upon Bach. Because I would start putting little guitar flourishes everywhere, And, now that's what I do for a living, is that I get paid for it, But so those early seeds were already planted, and she did allow me to premiere those works every year. So what a remarkable, freewheeling, exploring kind of childhood I had growing up, but I didn't know that composers were alive. I thought they were all bronze busts, like the ones that were on my little spinet piano. And then in 1989, when I was about to go into my senior year during this summer, and if you throw those of you that are old enough, you throw your minds back to 89, that was a moment kind of like what we're going through right now. There was great political change that was happening. I was very interested in what was going on in the Soviet Union with Gorbachev, Perestroika, Glasnost. We had the wall come down in Europe, the student protest in Tiananmen Square. I mean, a lot was shifting. Affirmative action was revving up as an answer to try to get more people of color into universities and even into the workforce. And I was about to go into my last year in high school, and I figured I need to get my extracurriculars up. And I was still studying with my piano teacher, and I saw in a newspaper, it was a newspaper because it was before the internet was around, it was an advertisement at some place called the San Francisco Conservatory of Music that I had never heard of, for a summer program in composition. And I knew I was a good improviser. I was a very bad reader of music because I had a good ear, I had perfect pitch. So I would listen to the Scarlatti or listen to the little pieces that my teacher was playing for me and learn it that way. So I said, I'm gonna do this. It's gonna make me look really good for college. And I remember that first day walking into the building. First of all, I saw such things as a clarinet teacher and a flute teacher. And there was like a teacher on every instrument that I had never seen before. And when I walked into that building, I was just overwhelmed by the music that was coming out at me from every room. And there was a piano in every room. And you have to remember that I used to love like hunting out different pianos that had a different sound than mine. And I would have dreams about exotic pianos. You lifted up the keys and there'd be little chocolates inside. It's just, it was real. I couldn't believe it. I walked into the classrooms and there were staff lines that were painted onto the wall. And then I opened up the textbooks, and instead of horrible chemistry and algebra, it was music. I remember my heart was beating like this, and what is this? And it took about 1 or 2 days, and I said, that's it. I'm gonna be a composer. And I made the decision that I'm still living by, today. But one of the reasons why I said this was that when I looked around at all the little kids in this pre-college program at the San Francisco Conservatory, I saw one mixed race kid. Some of you may know him, Kane Reedus Thomason, who's over at the Orchestra League. Yeah, he was with Sphinx. I mean, he's very experienced as an administrator. And he's a little bit younger than I am. I saw him, and that was about it. I did not see any Latino kids. I did not see many girls at all. And I remember thinking that the world needs me. I don't know where that came from, but that the world needs me. But it needed the best version of me. And so I think that spirit of participation, like my father had from the Peace Corps, of believing in our instincts, already exploring our intellect, our artistic voices, being interested in global cultures, is something that set me on a path. Whether it's gonna be going into music, or I was studying Russian at the time. I was planning on becoming like a poli-sci major, probably would have gone to law school. I think this is really essential, and I think all of you here are mentors and teachers of one kind. It can be very easy to fall into a routine of that's very regimented. There are certain music tests to follow, certain repertoire to learn, but if you can carve out space where there are no rules, perhaps your student can pick the repertoire. You say you can pick one of these 5 pieces, and then you have to tell me why. Like go online, read about it. I mean, something where they're making choices or they express something. Most children are composers. We just do a better job of identifying performing talent. This is something that I believe deeply in this country. But little kids, in their classes, they're just slapping paint on the canvas and they're just drawing whatever. They go to the piano and they're doing lots of minor seconds. They don't think it's like ultra modern avant-garde to be making these kinds of sounds. They learn these rules and they censor themselves somewhere along the way. I think this is what accidentally set me on a certain path. So I went into school and I received a lot of messages in the 90s that I wasn't supposed to be there. My first day at Rice, I remember practicing in this gloriously beautiful practice wing at Rice University. It had a view to grass, the piano was in tune, and I was playing something virtuoso with a short piece by Ravel called Jadot. And I was interrupted by a member of the piano faculty. He came in, he just burst into the door, it startled me, and he started demanding that I step away from the piano, that I go back to work. And I didn't understand this anger that was in his face, and I finally figured out that he thought I was a member of the janitorial help because they were all Latinas at the school. And I remember being a little mad, but very diplomatic, explaining in a very educated voice that I was in so-and-so's studio and I was practicing Ravel. I was just going through everything we do to survive in a moment as a young 17-year-old. And after he left, I got really mad. I said, what if I were a maid? It would be like Goodwill Hunting, Latina 2.0, it was just, wouldn't you lean in to see something like that? But instead it was this outrage that I found. And I think, from that moment, I'm in my mid-50s now, and I've always carried this spirit of, I'm always going to have to prove something. It's a little exhausting at times, but it's okay, because that's where we are in history. And through these past decades, how many waves of interest I have seen in diverse voices to get rolled back, and then another wave to get rolled back. And when I mentor my composers and I talk about this, I say it's very chancy to follow the interests of the industry. The only thing that's secure is for you to walk through this minefield, and everything's gonna get politicized around you, and you need to tell the stories that you believe in, and the stories that require a lot of work. And if you want people to believe it, you gotta have your craft. And this is why you work hard. It's not enough to find a cause that you wanna write music about, is that you have to back it up with a skill set. So my whole life has been an enterprise in convincing the world that, and insisting, not just convincing, insisting, because art tends to consolidate our insistence in sound or in paint or in colors, that we exist, that we have always existed, and we will continue to exist. Now, in this moment, we are in a particularly ugly time, and a time where people that were making pledges of good faith after George Floyd and after some of the things that didn't happen long term, a lot of that has been rolled back because of fear. Is the good work still has to continue. It still has to continue. You may have to be strategic. I'm working with a small university through my academy now that doesn't use the word DEI, but they use other words. They use inclusive. They use other words, and they're still doing the work. Because history has demonstrated that this moment will pass. It will pass. It may not pass for a while, but it will pass. And where do we want to be as educators? I don't want to feel like I was frozen in time and just got older and waited, petrified. And so I'm at the Met. I continue to write my things. I continue to put things out there. I continue to advocate for my composers. I continue to make the time to come down and for things like this and tell you the work that you do is so important. You're building our future. When I see kids, I get emotional because I want to tell them every decision you make right now is shaping the future, not just for yourself, but for your community. So I don't know if do we have time to take Q&A, or if there's anything specific that you're burning to ask. I have this big shiny career, I can talk about it, I'm still amazed by it. But I will just reiterate again, it was mentors, different mentors along the way that got me here.
So I do want to ask a very quick question before we open it up. Can you just talk a little bit about what your mentors throughout your career, even up to today, got right, and also what they maybe fell short on?
So let's start with the positives first, and the ones that really affected me. They were mentors that knew what I was capable of before I did. So I'll give you some specific examples. All my degrees were in music composition, but I was facile enough as a pianist that I attracted some interest to play music, whether it was chamber music, and that helped build my career because I met a lot of string players when I was back in the day when I was playing a lot of Brahms and Fauré and Franck and playing piano quartets and quintets. Well, first I'll start with a mentor that was like not so great, and then we'll go to the ones that were. And so I think, one piano teacher that I did have when I was welcome in to do a double major, I didn't look like what he expected. He had a story already in his head. And the story might have been informed by lived experience, that in his experience, people of color did not exist in classical music. He didn't interrogate that lived experience. And so he didn't spend a lot of time with me. I think this was an unconscious bias on his part. He didn't spend a lot of time with me in our initial lessons to actually give me real technique. But because I mentioned that I had a good ear and I was able to learn things by ear, I was learning repertoire very, very quickly. And I still remember I learned the Appassionata Sonata in 1 week and brought it in. I remember I learned 2 Chopin etudes by memory and brought that in the following week. I mean, it was just huge, gargantuan, but my technique was really not great. And of course, predictably, for somebody going from 1 hour a day to practicing to 8-9 hours a day, and I felt good. I felt like an athlete, with all the other piano majors in the practice rooms. I came down with tendinitis. And when I came in and I couldn't play, he said, well, it's what I expected. And he dropped me from the studio. And I fulfilled his expectations. The following year, a new piano teacher came in. And she rebuilt my technique. And she was very patient, and I believed in her. And she explained why I was just doing one note, just doing kind of like a woodpecker, one note, just to get the weight distributed well. I still talk to her this day. So that's the first thing I would say. A mentor that's not helpful is one that can't let go of preconceptions. It's very hard as a teacher. You learn what to teach, and it's very easy to do it by rote, the same curriculum, year in, year out. And sometimes the pressure of the university or whatever academy you're in doesn't allow you time to think. You're just trying to keep up. At the same time, it's really essential. Contrast that to another piano teacher I had later. So I never picked up piano major again, but I played enough as a composer. At Michigan, his name is Logan Skelton. You ever run into him, just give him a big hug because he's a real mensch and just changed lives. And I came in as a composer needing to take piano lessons to fulfill the degree there. And he heard me play, and after a couple months, he said, there's something here called the Piano Concerto Competition. Why don't you do it? It'll be like a shock. You're not a piano major, but you'll have to compete with the other pianists first to advance department by department. And I just went, okay, because he had my trust. And then he said, well, you could do Bartók, you could do what? Why don't you write your own? And I said, okay. And we kept it a secret. And there's something about, that's kind of been my modus operandi, is just keep it quiet. And then can I swear here? Get a little bit? Can I swear a little bit? Just a little mild. Then you're badass, when you come out a secret, right? And it's indisputable. And that's what happened. I just kept it really secret what I was doing. Make a long story short, I won. And that was the first time I had an orchestral work done, was Frank playing Frank. That's how it came up on the competition thing, And so that was a teacher, I never would have thought of that myself. That was a teacher who saw that. Then I had a couple other teachers. William Bolcom was like a second father for me. And Bill's work was always on turn of the century American song. He was already defiant. He wasn't doing the typical surrealism that was in vogue when he was a young man. And he revived interest in Scott Joplin, U.B. Blake, Jelly Roll Morton. He was really, really important for this movement. And he would hear me kind of grouse a lot about how I love, South American music, and I didn't know if I was entitled as a diaspora girl or a mixed race girl to be, incorporating that. And he was like, shh, just go to Peru. Why don't you just go to Peru? And I was just thinking, why do I go to Peru? Why can't I go to Peru? And I had erected all these barriers in my own head. And then from my mid-20s until my mid-40s, I made about 30, 40 trips to Peru. I was going once or twice a year, and that changed my life to be able to do that. So I think it's very important is to imagine paradigms that are bigger than the ones created by the students. I mean, they just opened up my world. And that's a feat of imagination rather than being lazy and going on a preconception. And so you have these, in my life, the two opposites there have really played. So I incorporate a lot of that in my own mentorship with my composers. I'll say, okay, I'm going to put you on a diet of 10 pieces. I want to see these 10 pieces written over the next 5 years. And I think in order to do that, Bartók's going to be a mentor composer for you. I mean, I try and push them, and I say, by the end of it, you're going to be able to write opera because we're going to get you in shape. Rather than opera being like something that, it's like something for the celestials to be able to do, is to imagine that path and to break it down for your students. And talk about it like in a normal voice, make it sound like something that you totally expect them to do. I will also say to my mentors when I do this to them, and I can see that light go like this, some lean forward and some kind of sit back a little bit. I'll say, because, you're supposed to go farther than me. You're the next generation. You're supposed to go places where I can't reach. And this is my lived experience why I think this will work for you.
Thank you. There was a hand up here before I jumped in with my question. But
Hi there. I'm a student of the Manhattan School of Music. Really excited to be here under your presence. I wanted to know what is maybe a piece of advice you would give to a younger student like me. I'm Latinx, I'm Latina, and I feel like I struggle in the classical music field sometimes with the heavy kind of racism, as of especially recently, but like the like you're a woman and you're Latina, like what is, and it sometimes makes me start to question like, am I supposed to belong?
I have
in
so
this
many
room?
answers for you, and we don't have enough time. But first of all, everything you're feeling is valid.
Okay.
You're not crazy. So anytime we feel like, am I crazy? Just say you're not crazy, but it may be like in a knot in your head, all the feelings. So the first thing I will say is you're not crazy. The second thing is that it's hard to figure things out by yourself. So if you have a peer group, they don't even have to be Latinas. They just need to be human, like deeply human, and be able to, that really helps. And so I have a good crew, around me that I still bounce situations off of, The third is, I was talking about the badass thing. That has gotten me out of a lot of trouble before, where it's hard to contain my skill set or my talent. I'm just going to be, I have so many answers, and so I'm going to have to be very broad because I don't know the exact, circumstances. I remember the first gigs that were given to me when I was younger, unlike for, say, a young white man, also talented, were to be put on, and it's not that I don't want to put down kiddie concerts, but you know what I mean, when you're not given the main stage or a subscription season concert. So if you're only going to give me 3 minutes, I'm going to make them the most amazing 3 minutes, and the players are going to be like, she knows how to write. Why are you only giving her 3 minutes? So that there's that kind of conviction that's from the inside. The thing about that, it takes time before that accrues momentum where you're not treated that well. So that's like one strategy that's for the long game. Others can be where even if it hurts you, you're not going to go to that space. And so I remember very early when some of my music was put on a Lusty Latinas concert, and there was like an annual tradition for this one small orchestra house. And it paid a lot of money, and there was like interviews, and I was like, no, I'm not playing into that stereotype. And so, others are like Valentine's Day Latino lovers concerts, and it's just like, no, I'm not gonna do those kinds of, things. Then you have situations where somebody in power is judging you, and you heard what happened to me when I was very, very young, and I did suffer from that. I found an angel a year later. I feel like I'm talking kind of broadly. I don't know if you want to paraphrase like an example, or because there's so many strategies to get around this nonsense. So you have to take care of your mental health. Obviously you were put on this earth to push back on that, and you already have been. Yeah. And then sometimes, have you heard of this concept where, what do they call it? sostenuto, I think for choirs, where you just hold out a tone. I think it's beautiful. Everybody just holds out a tone. And then different members stop and they take a breath, but you don't hear the tone waver, and then you jump back in. Everybody stops out. And if you're part of a group that's doing this work, you can just rest. Sometimes you just have to vent. I mean, it's going to be a whole host of strategies. It's nonsense. It can be harmful. That's how I've dealt with it. And but I didn't do it alone. That's the main thing. Now that I mentor more vulnerable people of color, or women, or trans people, or anybody that's in a vulnerable demographic, it's easier for me, and I take this as a responsibility, it's easier for me to speak out about it than it is for them. And so I can write an essay and get it put in the New York Times if I wanted to. You know, I pick my battles very carefully because every time I speak, I want people to listen. And so that's the other thing when I tell my mentees is that, yes, that's nonsense, and you could call it out, or you could just say, you're dumb, and walk on. And you pick your battles, you know. Your perspective changes, you know, as you go through more and more of this, and then you realize, this is why I was put on this earth. It's not to withstand, it's to help make that obsolete by the quality of my work. But just promise me that you're not going to do it alone, that you have to have a posse around you. Yeah.
Yes, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
So a recent Young Academy Award nominee made some disparaging comments about opera and ballet. I won't name him because my daughter's in love with him, but he, when you get past the obnoxiousness of the comment, he was highlighting something in that when you go to the New York Philharmonic or the New York City Ballet or the Met, it's a lot of people look like me sitting in the audience, older white people. And how do you bridge that? How do you get the classics of music, the ballet, the opera, the Philharmonic? How does that reach a broader, more diverse audience? Is it more diverse presentation? Is it writing about Frida Kahlo? Or is it saying somehow that Brahms and Beethoven should mean more to you than they actually do?
This is a critical question because we're talking about our survival as an art form and as practitioners of it. My own experience, let's use my opera as an example since we're talking about that. So when it premiered in San Diego Opera, it sold out. And it brought in record numbers of first-timers who then went on to buy a second seat at another opera. And one of the things that San Diego Opera did was they put up surtitles, not just in English, but in Spanish, without making a big to-do about it. It just was. Then went to San Francisco. It sold out there. And because that was in my home area, I went to every performance because I had friends and family that were going to each one, and they wanted to see me finally in a gown. So I was just like, okay, you know. So I went to every one of those. And what I saw Black people, Asian people, all dressing up as Frida Kahlo. It was amazing. And at the intermission, there was a buzz that everybody was excited. Said, what do you think of that? Is Diego like a jerk or not? You know, people were like really invested. And I was like, wow. And this is contemporary opera, you know. To me, the most important performance, even more than the Met, I know that's like the prestigious one, was when it went to Omaha, Nebraska. It sold out there too. Super diverse, and the Omahas come back to tell it that the people bought a second ticket and they went to traditional opera, you know, so they're tracking all of these people. Now, they created other events in Omaha. There was like they invited artists to do new artwork inspired by Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, so there were many exhibitions there, and it just took over the city. What the Met is doing is celebrating the opera through Manhattan with deals at restaurants, not just in Mexico, but all through Central America, like Nicaraguan restaurants and Salvadoran restaurants. So they're maximizing the splash. Went to LA, sold out. Chicago, almost sold out, you know. And first-time opera goers. And so I could be biased, but I think contemporary music is where it's at. And I think there's a kind of a coolness about opera that's contemporary because of the visual, where you can see something that speaks to somebody's now. I think that when people are talking about orchestra music, it's a little bit harder to make the case. And I remember a couple years ago, I was a keynote speaker. I went to the Opera World Forum. I was the new kid on the block with supposedly the recipe for the secret sauce on how to like get a hit opera. So they invited me there. And right after, I went to the Orchestra League. And the conversation, the tone at the World Forum in Opera, in which opera companies from all around the world were congregating for several days in LA, was how do we do new opera? We're proving it. We can bring in new audiences. I mean, that's a big initiative now at the Met. Whereas in the orchestra world, it was like, do we have to work with composers? I had to make more of a case. So lately, I have been inclining towards opera, and I've been spending all my 40s in the orchestra world. That was a big shift for me. There's something about the directness of the stories. The skill of the Met Opera House is equal to Philadelphia or New York Phil when you talk about the orchestra. And those players then go on and do chamber music series, then they do more traditional chamber music, and the fans follow them. They go there. Now we have AI coming up, and there's a lot of questions about what AI is going to be able to replace in concert music and acoustic music. And I was talking with Peter Gelb over at the Met Opera, but also Yannick, the conductor, and I was theorizing. And I said, I think this is going to make us lean into the live component of what we do, because we just know AI is never going to be able to replace like the thrill of a live. But I think we have to lean in even more, and where maybe performers have to talk to the audience. Maybe there are talkbacks or a Q&A, or there's just more access to what's going on, more open rehearsals. And I think we should include more young people to play with the professionals, and this might get some of them a little upset that the quality is going to go down. But most people cannot hear the difference between New York Phil and Boston, when they play. And so I just don't know about the investment we make in that way. I think if we can like open it up, people are listening. And when Matt said we're going to lean into new music, that caused a stir around the world, because that's one of the largest, most important classical music institutions. The other thing I think we have to address is our training in the conservatories. So when I go and I guest at universities, at Manus, I was just there, or Juilliard, or Rice, I feel like I'm back in the 90s. Like I step back in time. I see the same pieces, the same classrooms, the same curriculum, the same track of everything. Nothing's shifted, but the world has shifted. And I almost took a job at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. It would have been poetic if I had become a professor there. And I decided not to, because I decided to work with a smaller school, the University of Pacific, in the murder capital of California, Stockton, California, because they're trying to build a 21st century music school. And I find that more exciting, where they'll put jazzers and improvisers and performance artists and classical musicians all in the same room and give people more skill sets in that way. It's highly experimental, trying to figure out what this curriculum is going to be. But to me, I think that's a better use of my time, is to try and think about that rather than join up with a training program. I think this is another conversation we could have that I think is largely out of date.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, I'm just curious, which composers inspired you to help you find your musical voice?
I think Béla Bartók was a Latino in a previous life. I do. I mean, when I started playing his music, unlike Beethoven and Mozart, I was just memorizing it right off. It just fit my hands. I didn't have to work as hard. There's something about it which just fit my temperament, fit my physicality. And then I was really blown away by his ethics, how carefully he researched the music. He wasn't just feeling the music, he was actually researching it. And he had this very interesting practice of what was intellectual and what was intuitive. He was a great improviser, a great pianist. So obviously William Bolcom, because of his own incorporation of a popular idiom with classical music. And he was interested in opera as well. In fact, he's probably most well known for his songs that tell a direct story. I think he's pretty amazing. There are many indigenous composers of popular Peruvian songs that I really love. Nicomedes Santa Cruz was a black Peruvian We did a lot of research in Black Peruvian culture, and we tend to not acknowledge the existence of Black people in South America, which is just crazy because it's just like here in the U.S. I mean, it's not different at all. And for another, say, an opera composer, since that's been in my life, Benjamin Britten. And I think Britten was not afraid to take contemporary poets and contemporary topics, and like his War Requiem, he just tied it to Latin liturgical text, the pacifist text of a living Brit poet. So Mark Twain is something of an inspiration for me, not as a composer, obviously, but nowadays he may seem problematic in certain ways, but for his time, he opened all kinds of doors. And he was funding education of Black men that were slaves. I mean, this was very, very provocative kind of stuff he was doing. And some of the essays that he wrote about the politics at the time, he could be talking about what's going on right now. And I think composers are storytellers. We're cultural witnesses, and we put it into music. I think the best composers are those that are into people, into politics, into history. We argue, and then we write our music.